Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian he never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out and steal the election.
Boyko Borisov, the Bulgarian prime minister, tells Macedonians, quote, "I also understand you. Identity is important for a newly founded, or let's say young country, but we need to reach agreement," unquote. He said this in light of the newest scandal facing the Macedonian government, led by Citizen, a scandal in which it has come to light that Bulgaria is, surprise, demanding new concessions from Macedonia before Bulgaria will allow Macedonia to begin EU accession talks, despite having agreed to allow those talks to begin. A March 25 document from the Council of the European Union was recently made public, in which Bulgaria lists a number of demands that Macedonia must agree to before Bulgaria will allow Macedonia to start those EU accession talks. The government of Macedonia, for its part, through its foreign minister Nicola Dimitrov, lamely asserted that, quote, "good neighborly relations," unquote, is a two-way street. Unfortunately for Dimitrov and his government, that train left the station a long time ago. Who could have predicted that Bulgaria would make more demands on Macedonia? Inquiring minds want to know. We'll discuss all of this and more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the mostly free and sovereign state of Arizona.
And this is Cvetin locked in a crummy apartment in Skopje, Macedonia.
You have a very nice apartment, Cvetin. It's not a crummy apartment.
Well, but you wouldn't want to be locked in here for days on end. I just beat the curfew by 5 minutes a little while ago.
That's true. Yeah, I was talking with another buddy earlier over there about the curfew and whatnot, and I still assert that curfews are the last refuge of a totalitarian state. And I won't rub it in, of course, but this weekend I was up hiking in the Rincon Mountains east of Tucson with one of my brothers-in-law and another buddy.
Tell.
Yes, well, let me tell you all about that lovely trip in the high mountains, backpacking, sleeping out under the stars, campfire, and making breakfast and dinner. Brought up a flask of 10-year single malt Glenmorangie.
In the desert. Oh my God.
Yeah, it was very nice to get away and get out, and up there, hard to find cell phone contact up there. So the bottom line is that, of course, was away from email, the interwebs, the Google machine, the Twitters, all of that stuff, which was just glorious. You know what? I've said this before, but when I go on these hikes, and I do them every couple of months, I don't even think about Macedonia. Sorry. I love you all, but I completely forget about Macedonia. We barely talked about COVID. It's just more, enjoying nature. Saw lots of wild deer, lots of wild turkeys, believe it or not, up at 2,600 meters above sea level.
Seriously?
Whole flocks of wild turkeys, yeah.
Wow, did you bag one?
No. We brought up our own food, and I think we don't have a permit, and it's not hunting season, so we didn't go shooting wild turkeys, and as I said, we had our 10-year Glenmorangie, so we didn't bring any wild turkey bourbon with us.
Back here we are. I even sometimes forget to get out when I'm allowed to. Like, just remember. Oh wait, I got 15 more minutes, and instead of wild turkey, I have some crummy liquor here and chicken. So that's how we're keeping up.
They're conditioning you to stay indoors.
Yeah. I used to love it. I mean, I'm not an outdoorsy person, but now when you're forbidden from going outside, it's becoming annoying.
Yeah. Well, this is, of course, the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast, episode 69. We're recording this on Tuesday, April 28th. We would have normally recorded on Sunday, of course, but I was out hiking in God's country, so we're a little bit late. That's my fault, but plenty to talk about. I think we should make this a relatively COVID-free podcast. And because, number one, frankly, the big issue right now is, as I talked about in the monologue there, Bulgaria and their new demands, which have come to light. I've got this document in front of me, which I've already highlighted, from the Council of the European Union, the General Secretariat. Sounds very official. Brussels, 25 March 2020.
They have a stamp, watermark and everything.
Exactly. Yeah, it's got. I love these official EU documents. It says Annex 2, statement by the Republic of Bulgaria with regard to the adoption of the Council conclusions on enlargement and stabilization and association process, blah, blah, blah.
And by the
with
time
reference,
you read it, you're trying to gnaw your own veins and kill yourself.
It's, yes. Well, and it starts off with typical EU language, with reference to, pursuant to, bearing in mind, also bearing in mind, recalling that the treaty's
simple,
implementation.
Ultimately.
Yeah. The Republic of Bulgaria reiterates the following, and it lays out a number of demands of Macedonia, naturally. And again, just to put this in perspective, so the European Union essentially said in March, and I guess it was the European Council. I get all these various European Union presidencies and councils and parliaments, etc. mixed up. It's no way to run a government. But that's another issue. But anyway, so the EU agreed to allow Macedonia and Albania to begin accession talks back in March. And then comes to light this Bulgarian statement contained in this annex that says, well, hang on a second, Bulgaria's got a few more demands. And as we have talked about on this podcast and written, and so many others have as well, we all knew that Bulgaria, we also said that Greece would demand more concessions, and it still might.
Yeah,
that just haven't. I think they tag team each other. So right now it's Bulgaria's turn to
Good cup,
demand more
worse,
things.
A bad cup, worse cup.
Exactly, bad cup, worse cup. Well, let's see. Let's just go through here and cherry pick some of the things that the Republic of Bulgaria reiterates that it wants. Implementation of the bilateral treaty that will be evaluated at all stages of the accession process of the Republic of Macedonia, although it doesn't say that, to the EU, prior to giving the Republic of Bulgaria's consent, blah, blah, blah. And then it's got, let's see, 2A. Republic of Bulgaria would like to highlight its understanding that the implementation of the treaty shall encompass, the treaty being the so-called Treaty of Good Neighborly Relations that Dimitrov signed with, was it Dimitrov or Zaev? I guess Dimitrov signed with
Dimitrov officially.
Bulgarians, 2 years ago? Almost 3 years ago?
2017, it was done very soon after SDSM
Right.
grabbed power, so it's like 3 years ago.
3 years ago this summer, exactly. Yeah, it was in the summer, I believe. So, so basically,
Around
Bulgaria's
Ilindan,
demanding.
August 2nd.
What's that?
It was just before Ilindan, before August 2nd.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Let's kind of cherry pick this. Here's what Bulgaria demands: discontinuation by Macedonia of any support to organizations claiming the existence of a so-called Macedonian minority in the Republic of Bulgaria, including in international organizations such as the Council of Europe, blah, blah, blah. Here's a good one. The undertaking of measures by the authorities in Macedonia to, quote, actively prevent and, where necessary, investigate and prosecute any form of discrimination or hate speech against its citizens with Bulgarian self-identification or Bulgarian descent and cultural affiliation. I love these so-called hate speech clauses. It's also in the Prespa Treaty that the government of Macedonia is required to prosecute people who say things like, well, I don't know, the Bulgarians are a bunch of bastards or something like that. Yeah. Of course, I'm not a Macedonian citizen, so I guess they can't prosecute me.
Find a way, I'm sure.
Here's a good one. Implementation of the language clause agreed between Sofia and Skopje in the agreements of Macedonia with the EU, including the future negotiating framework. Thus, the linguistic norms spoken by the population of Macedonia should only be referred to as, quote, the official language of the Republic of North Macedonia, unquote, in EU documents, position statements, including the future negotiating framework. That's capital N, capital F. No document, position statement by the EU and its institutions can be interpreted as recognition of the existence of a separate, so-called, quote, Macedonian language, unquote. It's, it's just full of demands that, as we've talked about and reiterated many times before, that this is the attempt by the Bulgarians to deny the existence of a Macedonian people, a Macedonian language, a Macedonian history, a Macedonian culture, and okay, so I've this is the Bulgarians' position. I get that. They want to take as much as they can.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily blame them. Although I do think they are a bunch of bastards.
Sure.
And don't bleep that. It's the government of Macedonia, though, that agrees to this, or is waffling on it and won't say what it agrees to or doesn't agree to. What's been the reaction from the government there from lockdown?
Yeah, you didn't read down to Article 7b of the letter, which says we have Zaev and Dimitrov over a barrel, and we're gonna have our way with them. I mean, there is no reaction. There is what can they react to? They're bought and paid for, and this is precisely why Gruevski wouldn't sign on to anything with either Bulgaria or Greece, because we'll never hear the end of it. And while with the Greeks we are a different nation, there was never much love between us, and why should there be? And it's one, it's okay. I guess it's okay to have a cool and distanced relationship with them. Just strictly business. And with the Bulgarians, we are practically very close, and a lot of their culture, their history is actually ours. And I would just go to the beach, to the far end, to the Black Sea, actually. And I remember there is a hotel where I used to stay where they would just play Macedonian songs all the time. It's even noticeable. Even the other guests would notice, like, okay, don't we have any songs here? So, it's essentially a very close relationship. But once we have the same dynamic of Bulgaria deciding to block Macedonia, and this is essentially their way of saying that they're going to block Macedonia from opening EU accession talks, for petty political points scored by Boyko Borisov. This is definitely going to be felt next time I go to Sofia, or next time I have Bulgarian friends here, not to mention on social media. It's all, they tell us you're a made-up nation, you're Bulgarians, finally own up to this. Macedonians would often respond to them like, you are Tatars. This is the usual slur Macedonians use for Bulgarians when things get feisty, because Bulgarians have this nation founding myth that says that they're also both Slavic people, but also a Tatar people which lived in this is considered as a slur, obviously, in much of the Balkans. And but obviously Bulgarians, this is the Bulgar nation, so they have this duality. Well, we have the duality of the ancient Macedonians and the Slavs. So things are getting ugly, and they'll continue to get ugly, because de facto it's now clear that we did not get the date to open accession talks, because Bulgaria did not felt it's been sufficiently compensated, did not get enough implementation on the treaty they signed with Zaev. And they're right. I mean, Greece got all they wanted to a degree. Even they got even forepayment on the agreement. Zaev was implementing elements of his treaty with the Greeks, which should only be implemented years after we open accession talks, and not before that. While the Bulgarians say we did not get enough, and we can milk some more electoral points out of humiliating Macedonia, and we're going to do that. And they submitted this letter. They tried to keep it secret. Our government tried to keep it a secret. Finally, it was leaked by somebody to a news site in Macedonia, to the Makada news site, which published it in full. And we have now a week full of, recriminations and hatred going back and forth.
Actually, I found it on the Austrian, not the Australian, the Austrian Parliament website published it. Not quite sure what that's all about, but that's where I got the version that I posted on social media, and the copy that I have right now that I printed out and I'm holding.
Well, it was kept a secret for weeks, essentially. When was the council
Right.
meeting? This was submitted on the same day. And I'm sure.
Yeah,
the
this is yeah. As
conclusions
I
are
said, this document's
distributed.
dated March 25.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure this is distributed all around, and but everybody in our foreign ministry tried, to protect Dimitrov by concealing it, not mentioning it. But it's
Yeah.
bound to surface at some point.
Well, so just kind of taking a step backwards, or taking a kind of a 30,000 foot, 10,000 meter perspective. Um, First thing, I mean, the EU, of course, is in flux right now with COVID and everything else, and it's kind of amazing that they actually made this agreement back in March to allow Macedonia and Albania. And of course, there's still questions about Albania as well. They've got their own issues, but there is no date right now to begin talks yet. Correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Is there any idea of when? I mean, we got summer coming up, and of course, everything's been thrown off kilter with COVID, and so typical
No
summer.
later than, not sooner than June, but God knows. I mean, there's
He
something
might not
happens
even
in
know.
June.
All right, so no earlier than June.
Yeah, no sooner than June, but something happens then. But who knows? That's supposed to. They have something they call like an intra-government convention or something, which is actually the opening of accession talks, and this can't begin before June. There is also some additional conditioning actually especially for Albania,
Right.
but also possibly for us. So it's not. I mean, every country. It was said there are still conditions, not for Macedonia, but since it's not opened yet, since it's not done yet, that means that some country can still condition the opening of accession talks, and Bulgaria seems very likely to do so unless we deliver by June sometime.
Right. Okay, so most of the stuff we won't see Bulgaria trying to trigger before that, although one of the points in this document is that Bulgaria is demanding is, quote, active engagement by Macedonia, quote, in reaching a definitive agreement on the entire spectrum of the work of the joint multidisciplinary expert commission on historical and educational issues created under the treaty, including reaching agreement on key figures and events from our common history with Macedonia, quote, up to 1944, on specific dates for the joint commemoration of those events and figures on which agreement has been reached. So this goes back to the commission. I think that it ceased working some time ago when they couldn't reach an agreement on Goce Delchev, the Bulgarians, of course, insisting that Goce Delchev was Bulgarian. So that is something I think that Borisov and his government are going to try and push forward now, and I guess it'll be a virtual meeting on Zoom or something to try and get you all to agree to whatever the Bulgarians demand on that.
Yeah, the language, which is one issue in which Bulgarians essentially demand that Macedonia acknowledges that the Macedonian language is a Western dialect of the Bulgarian language. That's not something we need to act on. That's just Bulgarians telling the EU that they don't want to have a separate translation booth like they have for all the other languages, to have one for the Macedonian language. Instead, they're going to insist that in all documents, even if there is a translation booth, it says language of the former, whatever we are called now officially by the EU.
Prince, the artist formerly known as Prince, is what you're called. So.
And maybe later on they would demand that we start teaching our children, the class which is now known as the Macedonian language to be named as, our language, native language, official language of whatever, not Macedonian, but in the books. But this is still not what they demand. Now they're just telling the EU that since we're drawing up these documents, don't you dare write this is in Macedonian. Mm-hmm. And Zaev signed the treaty with Borisov, which says that it's signed in the official language according to the Constitution of the Republic of Bulgaria, and the official language according to the Constitution of North Macedonia. It was still Macedonia then, I suppose.
Yeah, Republic of Macedonia. Yeah.
So there is no action here, but the action on the History Commission, which has Zaev's hand-picked historians on one side and Borisov's historian on the other. And even these Zaev stooges, even they wouldn't accept that they sign on a document which says that Goce Delchev was a Bulgarian. They had some compromise formula on Tsar Samuel. He was essentially now declared a Bulgarian Tsar. His kingdom was known the Kingdom of Bulgaria, but this is eons before evolution of nation states.
1,000 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what his modern contemporary nationality would be, nobody knows. Never mind that. But now, Goce Delchev and people around him from the Vimera organizing days of the 18th and 19th century, they were, 19th and 20th century, they were modern contemporary national figures of nationalism understood in a contemporary sense. So Bulgarian demands that we sign on a document which says that declares them Bulgarian, and Borisov says we can accept that you say that they fought for the liberty of Macedonia, not necessarily a nation state of Macedonians, but for the liberty of, let's say, the territory of Macedonia, something like that. But essentially you need to say that they're Bulgarians. This latter formula, that they declared themselves in documents as Bulgarians, but fought for the liberty of Macedonia, was proposed by Stevo Pendarovsky, our president. So now Borisov is obviously pocketing this concession and demands that the commission signs onto this, that Macedonian historians accept this, and the historians did the honorable thing and they said, oh look, we have elections coming up. Oh no, now there is the COVID epidemic, we can't meet anymore, sorry guys, gotta run. And Borisov now says he demands that we meet, that the commission resumes its work and possibly via Zoom. So we'll be the first nation that gives up its national history via Zoom or Skype or Instagram or whatever.
We just came up with the title for this podcast.
Yeah, surrender to Zoom. The Zoom capitulation.
I like it.
Yeah. And this is what he wants as a deliverable before June, I suppose.
Wow. All right, let's switch subjects slightly. Not subjects, but let's talk about Denko Meleski, Macedonia's first foreign minister, who apparently published an editorial the past couple of days in which he says that Macedonians and Bulgarians were, quote, the same people, unquote. So he is obviously a citizen, so he's a leftist. He is, I understand that he really didn't want Macedonia to leave Yugoslavia in the first place, right?
Oh no, he was a foreign minister of a country that was seceding but said, oh, you can secede but without me. I'm staying.
Well, and so he made, he's made this, published this editorial in which basically he's agreeing with the Bulgarians. What kind of influence does he still have there?
Nothing in terms of influence, but it's very symbolic because, he didn't want Macedonia to secede from Yugoslavia or essentially from Serbia. He was so diehard Serbian, pro-Serbian, that he couldn't imagine an independent country without Serbia taking care of it. In a sense, he's still at this position, except that he's willing to trade overlords. He still does not believe in independent Macedonia, but he's now willing to trade his masters in Belgrade with masters in Sofia. But it's shocking, you couldn't imagine. I was joking on Twitter, I literally have him written on my phone contact list as Denko Maleškić, because he was so hardcore pro-Serbian. I wrote his last name in the Serbian version because, this is, he was a joke. He was a caricature of bootlicker for Yugoslavia.
Right.
And for him now to say, well, we need to acknowledge that we were the same nation once and that, our history is essentially written as a lie. We cherry-picked bits and pieces of history. Now let's look into the books by the New York Times, which wrote that, Macedonians were Bulgarians at the time when they started an uprising. Well, listen, when the Americans started the uprising against the British, I'm sure that not the New York Times, but the London Times said British colonists in the Americas are revolting. They did not say the Americans are starting a rebellion. I mean, obviously it was a nation founding rebellion, a rebellion to create a nation in one sense, but not in the sense that Borisov means it, because Borisov means it as a newfound nation.
Right.
No, it was a rebellion to create a nation based on the deep and unimaginable depth of history, tradition, and culture of the Macedonians living here. So, but yeah, because the reporter said the Bulgarians are revolting because he obviously arrived through Bulgaria probably and had his briefings. But never mind. Denko is all too eager to surrender to our new overlords, like in that Simpsons episode with the journalist.
What's the character? This is the reporter, right?
Yeah, Kent Brokaw.
Right. And I, for one, am willing to welcome our new ant overlords. So, do you think Denko is doing this is this a trial balloon on behalf of the government, or is this doing this as an independent, doddering old fool?
Somebody is guiding him. I mean, he would not think independently, obviously. I mean, from everything we've seen, he does not think independently. And you know what's so funny? So we discussed how Dimitrov, he's essentially cursed by his own father, because Dimitrov, when he was member of parliament for Vimera, he said, "Whosoever signs off the Macedonian name, let his right hand wither," in this poetic, floral language in the 90s when we were disputing the name issue with Greece. And then decades later, his own son does it. But
now, is Nicola Dimitrov right-handed? He could be left-handed.
I haven't observed, but yeah, I mean, people keep joking about this, that there is now, how's your hand, buddy? But Dinko Malevsky, he's, as I said, he's an heir of the communist bourgeoisie of Yugoslavia. So his family was communist bourgeoisie, and his father was a writer, Vlado Malevsky, who essentially wrote the lyrics to the Denasman Macedonia anthem, Today Over Macedonia anthem, the current anthem. But the only reason this anthem was written is because the original anthem, Izgrej, Zora, Slobodata, Rise, Dawn of Freedom, was also embraced by Bulgaria. And even today we do not have a version which is sung in the Macedonian accent. When you sing it, it sounds kind of like Bulgarian. Izgrej, Zora, Slobodata. It sounds Bulgarian. We need to rewrite it, obviously. This is the anthem which was performed at the Aslam, the creation of the Macedonian nation state during World War II. But then it was shunned aside, and they got Vlado Malevsky to write the lyrics to a new tune and have a new anthem. So Denko's father was literally involved in airbrushing a song which they deemed as, okay, well, they sing this in Bulgaria too, we can't have it as an anthem of Macedonia. And now he's willing to spit on the work of his own father for some perks, I suppose, money, I don't know what's driving him directly. But even more ridiculously, in 2019, Denko was running to be the president, to be the SDSM and DUI candidate for president.
Yeah.
And at one point, DUI started saying, okay, we can accept an SDSM candidate, but only if it's Denko or, what was the old defense minister, the young guy? They said because they both have an ethnic Albanian parent. So DUI was briefing that Denko's mother was allegedly Christian Albanian, so they said he's acceptable because he has enough Albanian red blood cells in his body. And Denko would not confirm or deny that his mother spoke Albanian and was Albanian. So he was toying with declaring himself an Albanian. He was Yugoslav pro-Serbian. He was willing to become Albanian. But now, in his old age, he says, well, let's try something new. Let's instead of picking up Peloton or yoga or something, well, let's become a Bulgarian. Let's see what the fuss is all about.
Wow. So it sounds like he has dementia, frankly.
Could be, yeah.
Not quite sure who he is.
But it's interesting how Bulgarians pick these guys, the worst sellouts, the people who were willing to serve one regime and now another. I mean, this is what's going to deteriorate relations. Like in the US, there is a bunch of people who want their own country, proud in what they have, their heritage, and another who deny all this and say it's all a lie, based on genocide, stealing the land from the Indians. Columbus was a war criminal, blah, blah. And we have those two, but our guys are in the because we're not big enough to, they're not undermining their own country, they're selling out their country, in our case, to the highest bidder, and now the highest bidder is changing. And, people who followed one set of rules, Denko's comment was tweeted out today by Borian Jovanovski, whose family was also this Yugoslav bourgeoisie rewarded and praised by the Yugoslav regime for, a writer father who was willing to work for the regime, and according to some documents that surfaced, was spying on fellow writers, what they're writing, and he was spying on a dissident Dragan Bogdanovsky, according to these documents. And now they're willing to sell their services to a country which they themselves demonized for decades, and they put they worked for a regime which put countless Macedonians who wanted a nation state, and some who wanted to side with Bulgaria, but they lumped them all together. They lumped, obviously, the pro-Macedonian patriots and the pro-Bulgarian activists in the same category to tar and feather the pro-Macedonian ones. So the families who served for the Yugoslav regime and who worked for communism, now they're trading the 5-star, the red star for the NATO star, and they're trading Serbia for Bulgaria. This is while the normal Macedonian patriots who were for independence from Serbia, but who are not subscribing, not for the sake of joining Bulgaria, and who do not subscribe to this a new push, trading one overlord for another. Like, Jesus Christ, what kind of... Look at these
that kind of goes back to my story, which I've told many times. A friend of mine in 2004, an Estonian diplomat, kind of high-ranking in his country's foreign ministry, he called me up and he said, well, now we're trading one master for another, from the Soviet Union to the European Union. So, now, on that issue, the European Union, of course, all of this that we're talking about right now, Bulgaria and its new demands, they're issuing these because Macedonia has stated that it wants to join the European Union, and accession talks, and blah, 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 and the Republic of Bulgaria saying, okay, yes, well, you want to join the EU, well, you have these other things these other little hoops you got to dance through. I'm mixing my metaphors. All these hoops you got to jump through. Now, that brings up the question, of course, is the European Union in its current form going to exist in 10 years when Macedonia would join, assuming that the normal process went forward? I think there have been a lot of questions about that over the past decade. The UK, of course, being the most glaring example of how the EU probably is going to be falling apart, and now on the heels of the UK successful Brexit, which of course the details are still being worked out, but on the heels of Brexit, the COVID crisis has really exposed some major fault lines within the European Union, especially between the North and the South. And so, again, I think a lot of people are questioning whether or not the European Union is going to exist in 10 years. Yeah. And if it does, in what form? It certainly won't be the form it is now. I think that's a true statement. And which then becomes the question then becomes, does Macedonia really want to join? It's not a requirement. It's not necessary. There are other alternatives available. So, but it depends on First of all, we have to get rid of this current government that's in Macedonia.
Yeah, this was our policy before under Gruevski. I mean, we were not going to accept this national humiliation, among other things, because it will never end. Like the Arab saying goes, a falling camel draws 1,000 daggers. So once they see us falling, everybody's going to jump in. Bulgarians, Albanians, Greeks, Serbs, they will all want a peace, geographical, cultural, historical dominance over the trade, the businesses, etc. So, Gruevski was being acerbic. He was being abrasive toward the neighbors, but it was for a good reason. If you do not at one point intercept them and their pressures and say, okay, that this far and not a step further, they're never going to end, and it's ultimately going to collapse the country. I mean, if maybe you've noticed this, what was the it was a disappointing thing. Some guys from the American Enterprise Institute, some girl who works for Danielle Pletka, she wrote an article about, the same usual boring, reheated stupidness from 2015-16. Weimar Russians, is DSM pro-European, pro-American, blah, blah, blah. But, they had a point, look, this is a weak country, and Russia is recognizing the weakness, so what do we do here, because we admitted a country which is so weak. And,
Right.
and that's precisely the point. We've weakened the national identity of Macedonia to the point that there is no purpose of having a separate country if it's part Albanian, part Bulgarian. I mean,
Right.
this is now Bosnia, but it's in NATO, and it can collapse within NATO. I mean, Cyprus can exist, but it's an island. We do not have an island. This is now more to Vancho Mikhailov's theory of a Switzerland in the Balkans, separate Bulgarian canton, large one, separate Albanian canton, smaller one, maybe one for the Serbs or the Vlachs/Greeks, whatever. This is putting two NATO member states, Albania and Bulgaria, on collision course over a third nation state, a third NATO member, which can't end well. And this is why we're resisting these pressures, because we knew that it can explode regionally.
Right.
But, we keep asking the Bulgarians, okay, what's your end game? Do you have a play here? Do you want to, establish something like a Bulgarian Macedonian Republic? Like, let's lump Macedonia with Pirin Macedonia, the part of Bulgaria which is, which was part of the partitioned Macedonia that was divided in the Balkan Wars in 1913, the part around Blagoevgrad, Gorno Jumejsko, and have it as a unit within Bulgaria. Okay, let the capital stay in Sofia, but have a Bulgarian Macedonian state, or no, if you ask me, a Macedonian/Bulgarian state. Because, the way you're pushing, but they don't seem to have a grand plan. They do not seem to have an end game here, other than Boyko Borisov scoring some points politically in his fight with Rumen Radev, the president, but he will unwittingly provoke a clash around the territory with the Albanians and possibly Serbs. I mean, it's happened 5-6 times through in the last century alone. I mean, it's inevitable that they're going to provoke it again. And now Borisov understands that he's having a counter reaction among Macedonians pushing so hard. So he tapes a video of him singing some stupid cover of an Italian communist song about the coronavirus by a guy whose father was one of the worst pro-Yugoslav communist writers in Utrinski Vesnik, and a drunken actor, Dragan Spasov, and he's like trying to do some PR for Macedonia, for Macedonians, but he just comes off as slimy and sleazy, because he then goes on Sital TV, Sital, which aired this movie, the third half, which Bulgarians go ballistic once it's aired on television. They aired it like a few days ago, and this was considered a provocation by Bulgaria, because it portrays the Holocaust of Macedonian Jewry who were essentially deported by the Bulgarian army. And Borisov goes to this TV station, and in front of the journalist, he's, but we're not blocking you, we're brothers, we're friends. Who said we block you? You speak a language, we understand the language. He's like trying to do a PR thing, but then at the same time, he wants to be tough guy before his own audience, but he wants to be like this, middle of the road guy before the Macedonian audience. He's literally doing this for political points in Bulgaria. He admitted as much in the interview. He said, I have people pressuring me in Bulgaria, so I have to do this. I don't want to do this, but I have to because they're pressuring. Like, Jesus. And he's going to, everything that's being done is leading toward the creation of a Bosnia or a Switzerland in the Balkans, which has a lot of explosive, especially if Kosovo begins getting redrawn. It's very likely that Macedonia is going to collapse as well.
Right. Well, this is why, and I remember an article I wrote, I don't know, sometime in the past year, I think it was called National Identity as a National or Identity as a National Security Issue. And
Yeah,
for any responsible government of Macedonia, and I don't include the current government in that, but a responsible government of Macedonia, including the elites of society, whether they're in civil society, education, Manu, even business, even faith institutions, would understand and would all work toward this idea that, to your very point, that in order to keep the state stable and strong, the core identity must be protected, and that is of the Macedonians. And so this current government has demonstrated that it does not consider the identity of the Macedonians to, or I should put it, the current government considers the identity of the Macedonians to be malleable, plastic, changeable, which creates, as you put it, opportunities for others, bad actors, primarily Bulgaria and Albania, to come in and say, well, you don't know who you are, then you're part of us, and we're gonna pick you apart. And add into that the fact that Macedonia is now a member of NATO. It gets really complicated really quick. So I do hope, and maybe this is a good way to transition to one more subject in this podcast on elections. So I do hope that this is something that Vomarodopamene is considering talking about in its campaign, whenever those elections may be. Now, there is talk, of course. Looks like Citizen wants to recall Parliament back into session, and I know there's constitutional issues with that, and it's very muddy, shall we say, right now. And I find it interesting, Cvetin, that Talat Jaferi, the so-called Speaker of the Macedonian Parliament, who was basically installed 2 years ago, and that's a whole other subject, but he's with DUI, which is the junior partner in the Citizen DUI coalition. He's resisting this. Citizen wants to recall Parliament. I wouldn't be surprised if they try and force him out one way or the other. But what's the current talk on possible elections and when and all that other stuff?
Well, it's simple. SDSM tried to get us to vote in the midst of the pandemic because they think that if they wait, the economy... So far, I mean, weirdly, the economy has not been affected, at least noticeably. I guess this is because of borrowing and essentially just spreading money around. So SDSM considers that Venko Filipic, the healthcare minister, built up some reputation, just like in any other country. People have identified with the leader, and he was the front face of the corona effort, even though it was dismal, as we discussed the last episode, the only country which had as many government members quarantined because of the coronavirus, including the healthcare minister.
Right.
But they think that they're still good. They might even have improved a little, but they assume that as time goes by, as the numbers economically get worse, the numbers are bad healthcare-wise, but it's 5 people, 3 people, 1 person dies every other day. This other thing, the economy is what's going to drive the elections, they suppose. So they wanted to have elections sooner, and basically wanted to have their voters go to the polls and catch the virus, no matter what, just lay their lives for Zaev to hang on to power for 4 more years. So they wanted to have elections in June or July. VMRO and DUI said, no way, this is ridiculous. And right now, SDSM is apparently withdrawing this idea, and we're most likely going to go with a meeting of party leaders in May to discuss how, if they all agree on a date, then I suppose somebody can order the State Electoral Commission to begin preparing for a new date. Although the elections haven't been called off legally, we just allowed the date to lapse. So really there is no certainty who can call elections at this point, but somebody has to. SDSM wanted to do this unilaterally through the parliament, through their majority in parliament, but even they were going to throw their voters under the bus and use them as masks, in an interesting bio-warfare experiment, but I guess they're going to give up on the idea.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's worth pointing out, too, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but President Stevo Pendarovsky extended the emergency order for another month. Is that correct?
Yeah, and he said that it's unconstitutional. He said he does not have the right to do that.
But he did it
because
anyway.
people are dying. Yeah, because it's very important. I'm going to do it. Like,
Right.
Jesus Christ. what?
Yeah.
What bunch of idiots.
So it sounds like, yeah. So there's a lot of confusion politically and regarding the constitutionality of the state of emergency, the elections, parliament, in the middle of a pandemic. And I think it's worth noting, we're recording this on Tuesday the 28th. I think another 6 people unfortunately lost their lives in the past 24 hours.
Yeah, it's the worst toll so far, I think.
Yeah, so the numbers are not going down despite what people might think of the health minister. Yeah. And you're right on the economy. Although on your point, you said you hadn't noticed anything economically, but 15,000 people in the restaurant and cafe industry are out of work right now. So that's no small number.
Yeah, it will take a while for me to notice this, but yeah, I suppose that people are noticing this, and I'm sure people are noticing.
Yeah. So, well, so we'll see. So May 1st is again. This is we're recording this on Tuesday. This will probably drop tomorrow on Wednesday. There is going to be a May Day is on the 1st of May Day is on Friday. And it's a long weekend, and you're not going to be celebrating outside or in the countryside.
Yeah, rub it in.
Yeah, so
I was thinking if I have time to go grill something and get back home by 2, I think. I keep forgetting what the curfew is now. They keep changing every other day. It's getting... Yeah, let's sign off with a joke.
Okay.
I heard a Serbian joke about Bulgarians. They have this narrative that Bulgaria always sides with Germany against the Serbs, and they have a stab in the back narrative about the Bulgarians. So now they have like a meme being spread in Serbia. It says, Bulgaria sides with the coronavirus to attack Serbia. and the worst thing here is, and I keep pointing this out to my Bulgarian friends, is they're picking on us, but Serbs, who are also a candidate for EU accession,
right,
they say such horrendous things about Bulgarians in their history books, no less, and Bulgaria just rolls over and lets them. So they're now blocking Macedonia and Albania. Ironically, they want, and we're back to our previous topic.
Right.
So Bulgaria demands that Albania accepts that Macedonians who live in Albania, one country over from Bulgaria, are Bulgarians.
Right.
And they're going to block Albania unless Albania accepts this. So they're blocking Macedonia, a small country divided with a sellout government. They're blocking Albania, smaller country, But Serbia has all these anti-Bulgarian narratives in their history, of course. And they're not blocking Serbia, it's fine. And not to mention that Bulgarians are also, by claiming Macedonians, they're obviously claiming Macedonians in Aegean Macedonia in the north of Greece. They obviously claim Kukush, Drama, Siras, the more eastern cities of Aegean Macedonia as Bulgarian. They've occupied them a bunch of times and had to give them back. I think largely they claim the more western parts as well, like Enija, Avodan, Lerin, Kostur, etc. Because, we are all Bulgarians,
right,
according to their narrative. And these were Macedonian cities, ergo Bulgarian. But they do not have a dispute with Greece. They do not have a dispute with Serbia over this. They start a fight, pick a fight with us. And, this is also unseemly of Boyko. Well, pick a fight with someone your own size, Well, don't pick a fight with us.
He's going to pick a fight with whoever he thinks is the weaker party. So let that be a lesson to Macedonians.
This tells you how it's all domestic politics. He just wants score a few points, humiliate Zaev, and at some point, I suppose there's gotta be a level to which people respond to Zaev being humiliated and get a hard-on from a sellout like Denko being humiliated. It's what's this? It's like paying somebody to dance for you like a monkey. Well, what you get out of that?
Well, on that note, I'm going to wish you a happy May Day.
Yeah. I don't celebrate that. And, the joke here as well is that, we don't need a curfew for May Day because it's a communist holiday. It always rains on May Day. And rain is forecast this year as well.
All right. Very good. Well, all right. I think that's a wrap. I do hope you enjoy the weekend with your family, however you choose to celebrate.
Thank you, buddy.
I think you're right on going out and doing some grilling. I think that's the appropriate way.
Yeah, if I get out at 6 a.m, I may get my work done in time
All right.
for the curfew.
Great.
Okay, buddy. Take care.
All right. You too. Take care.